Today we're going to talk about 10 side effects of the current pandemic that nobody could have predicted. Let's get to it. Alright, so we should start this off on the lighter side because I guarantee you it is definitely going to be a serious discussion. Nobody could have anticipated the group thinking obsessiveness over toilet paper. It was something that was so irrational, but picked up so fast by the masses. That's not to say toilet paper doesn't have a place in preparedness. I know this full well because we predicted this for years. Just ask the toilet paper warlord who was talking about this back in November 2019. But realistically, this trend was picked up and carried like one of those memes that really makes no sense that everybody's talking about it, but everybody just decides to talk about it. And sure enough, everybody did it. Tom Green proposed an interesting theory on the Joe Rogan channel in which he indicated that because toilet paper is so large and because a store can only store so much of it for that reason, that it was one of the first things that looked as though it was being depleted. This led to the appearance of empty aisles and fueled the misperception that there was going to be a toilet paper shortage. And just like the irrational momentum of a stock market rally, everybody followed like lemmings to a cliff. The irony is that I'm sure a lot of this pandemic was actually spread by people who were going to buy toilet paper to prepare for the pandemic. This behavior was most popular in the United States, and maybe, just maybe, that would explain why the numbers are so high there. Just a hunch. Now, on a more serious note, nobody could have predicted the extent of a lockdown. Any Hollywood movie that has depicted a worldwide outbreak never predicts a worldwide lockdown, maybe just because it would lead to boring cinema. But nobody could have anticipated the lengths that the government was willing to go to economically self-destruct and force their population into even more generations of debt servitude to pay back all of those ones and zeros and IOUs that will have been accrued by the end of this crisis. The next thing that nobody anticipated was hospitals, which were actually underwhelmed, and this was primarily due to the lack of accidents because of the lockdown, a lack of sporting injuries, and this drop in social activity led to a dramatic drop in health emergencies. This is a very significant variable that nobody factored in when they were making their projections about the curve and how long it would take to flatten it. Now, I personally did not anticipate the social stigma against wearing a mask. In the early stages of this, there were many stories of shop owners who were kicking people out of stores for wearing personal protective equipment because they didn't want to scare other customers. Of course, in Asian countries, wearing masks is part of the culture. But in North America, where people are a bit more self-conscious about this because it's not a part of our culture, it took people a lot longer to come around to this idea. And this may well be another contributing factor to why it has spread so far and wide in Western countries. Now, with all SHTF scenarios that we've hypothesized about on this channel, part and parcel with that will be a contraction of the economy. But because we never anticipated a global lockdown scenario, I don't think many of us anticipated the economic impacts we're seeing. For instance, the negative price of oil. Nobody could have foreseen that the worldwide lockdown would contribute to an oil oversupply, in that we had so much excess oil that you had to pay people if you wanted to store it somewhere. Because we weren't factoring in the lockdown, most people did not anticipate the extent of the economic damage, especially the high levels of unemployment. Now, even though we didn't see the economic aspects of this in such vivid detail, at least, I think it came to no surprise to anybody that the Fed was going to start printing money left and right. The next thing on the list is that I never anticipated that this would become such a politically divisive issue, and such a clear-cut one at that, where you had one group of people who are clearly on the conservative end of things advocating for a back-to-work policy, and then you have another group of people who are mostly made up of people on the left who are protesting for workplace safety, who are protesting for rent. I never could have anticipated that it would be such a clear-cut divide right down the middle. And while it does appear that people are naturally gravitating toward these positions, I think it's undeniable that the media is playing a role in dividing people here. I think it's safe to say that everybody just wants to be safe. Everybody wants a healthy, functioning society. but we all have different ideas of what the reopening process should look like, and that of course has deepened the rift once again between left and right. Another thing I never anticipated as being so heated, even though you always kind of expect this because of the day and age that we're in, but it was the information battle between various agencies and various perspectives about what exactly was going on. Now, obviously, you're always going to have your fringe theories to explain whatever crisis is happening, but it does appear that there are a lot of ideas challenging the mainstream narrative. Some of them have legitimate concerns, others are outright false and have been debunked and disproven. Another thing I never anticipated was some of the things that would be going out of stock, and again, this all stems from the lockdown. So I never anticipated that it would be hard to find exercise equipment or certain appliances like freezers. I mean, we all anticipated that there would be food shortages and even shortages of medication and some toiletry items, but it was those larger shelter in place for long periods of time items that people could use to replicate their normal everyday lifestyle that went out of stock, and it was something I never anticipated. Fortunately, I was able to scoop up a universal workout machine just in the nick of time. Another thing that most people haven't anticipated and that most people still don't even realize is around the corner is a shortage of media. That is, a shortage of TV shows and movies, because none of that stuff is being done right now. So expect to be watching reruns for the next year or so, or just expect to watch movies that are going to be really rushed because Hollywood will be trying to appease the post-pandemic demand. Another thing I think we all kind of anticipate in the back of our minds was that the stigma of preparedness would suddenly be relaxed. And we also learned that the media has absolutely no idea about personal protective equipment and emergency preparedness in general. This was evident in the ridiculous discourse over whether masks, which were engineered to protect people against the very pathogens in question, would actually be effective in slowing the pandemic. Now, the media eventually did learn about the effectiveness of N95 masks, but it appears that they still don't know about the existence of N99 masks, P100 masks, half-mask respirators, full-face respirators, PAPR machines. Now, another thing that a lot of people didn't anticipate was the bottleneck effect in the supply chain. We all knew that there would be shortages and supply chain disruptions due to people not being able to work or to government enforced shutdowns. But nobody could have anticipated that because of the closure of restaurants, that this would have such a devastating bottleneck effect throughout the economy. When restaurants shut down, a lot of food producers actually saw their demand decrease. And without the appropriate government subsidies, some of these places are going to be forced to go out of business. This has led to the full-scale culling of a lot of livestock and a lot of crops left rotting in the fields. In addition to that, nobody could have anticipated these outbreaks at these meat packing facilities. Although it's not that hard to imagine, considering these places are not very sanitary in the first place. This, of course, led to production slowdowns again. And going back to where all this started, I don't think anybody thought too deeply about how significantly the supply chain would be effective if the world's industrial engine shut down, that being China. Now, lastly, and this one's to do with the economy as well, and I'm sure there are many more, and feel free to post things that you've observed in the comments section, but it was the economy's immediate V-shaped recovery. Now, we know that this is not going to last that long because unemployment is at 20%. There's going to be less people who qualify for credit and loans. There's going to be less people buying cars. All businesses are going to take a hit even if we reopen, being restaurants, stadiums, airplanes. Any business that would normally have a large grouping of people in one place is going to suffer. The GDP for every country on earth that was affected by this is going to contract significantly. There's going to be a lot of people out of work, and it's going to take a long time for the supply chain to be totally restructured. So nobody could have anticipated such a quick bounce back in the stock market. Now, there's a lot of people who are saying right now that, yeah, well, the stock market isn't really a reflection of the economy, but that's really stupid. Obviously, the stock market, to some degree or another, is a reflection of the economy. But the economy, that is the situation on the ground with people who don't have enough money to pay rent, is far removed from the speculation or hindsight of the stock market. The stock market exists in the future and the past, but not the present. But ultimately, on a long enough timeline, these speculative bubbles will burst. We will accept that we are in fact in a recession. The economic contraction will be realized in the markets, and we can finally get on with the rebuilding process. It's become pretty clear that we are now at the tail end of that unjustified V-shaped stock market rally in which people, for some reason or another, even though they knew all of the variables, just assumed that everything would get better somehow, some way. We know by now that that's not going to happen, and that this is going to be a long, long year. Now, one last thing to consider, and this is something I never considered, was that lots of people would be forced to homeschool. Now, if you already homeschool, then you're a winner in this situation. That's one less thing that you had to worry about, or one less learning curve that you had to ascend. But for me, this personally was very much a challenge, and it will certainly, moving forward, be a bigger part of my preparedness planning. Let me know in the comment section things that caught you off guard about the current crisis. The best way to support this channel is to give the video a thumbs up if you found it useful, insightful, or entertaining, and feel free to subscribe for more of the same. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out. The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, your one-stop shop for premium, high-quality, brand-name products that have been tried and tested by myself and other YouTube gear reviewers. My subscribers save 10% off by using the coupon code SURVIVALPREPPER. All one word in all caps.